Hello, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. In today's tutorial, because it is currently 37 degrees C or just above 100 degrees Fahrenheit here in Las Vegas at the height of summer, and my AC is busted, instead of doing something science fiction related or something of that nature, I thought I'd make myself some nice little ice cubes here and using Turbulence FD get some kind of dry ice effect going on and have it pop out in render looking something like this. So let's take a look really quickly at how this comes together. First of all, I've got a scene in here which has a number of ice cubes in it. This was created just by creating one single ice cube and then cloning those and parenting them underneath of the first cube. Now, I have a special tool for doing this, but you can do this in Modeler if you want to. I decided to do it using my little special tool, which is the Liberty 3D Higher Clone tool, which you can get off of our website for free. And it just allows me to do really easy stagger and move things around really, really quickly while keeping individual cubes. Now, main purpose for this is, one, I can move things around very easily by having them all sitting underneath of the main cube. And the second part of it is also that under bullet, we can all have them set as rigid objects very easily. But also under TFD, under the emitters tab, you'll see that it's just generic cube 1, or generic I cube as an ice cube 1. Now, this has the mode by default include children. In this particular case, it makes a lot of sense to use that because it's going to evaluate all those objects kind of as one object in one go. And for Turbulence FD, this is an easier thing to do than having individual TFD handlers or the fluid handlers on each object. So if you go over to render, or appearance, pardon me, you'll see this little fluid emitter here. Now, I can also do this by having this fluid emitter and copy it after I make a change, for example, to these settings on it, and then paste it onto various cubes or have individual cubes do their own thing, but they would have to be unlinked from the chain for include children to have those settings take hold. But this is a really great thing that you can do now is you can actually copy these attributes, go to another cube and paste it in. You'll see that there isn't actually an attribute here. It's just going to treat it all as one. But if I wanted to, I could have it as a custom object. Right click it, hit paste in the field there. And now you see that I've got a cube with its own properties. And I can go and choose single object. I can go in here and change pressure on it, the channel emission. But that would mean I would have to take it out of the chain here because it's going to take one or the other. It's going to take basically anything from the parent all the way down with this one, and it'll just treat this one as the same as whatever is in the chain, or perhaps double it up, which we don't want. So I would have to take that Ice Cube 5 and pull it out of the chain here, and that would be totally acceptable. And I could add different values in here. But for speed purposes, Turbulence actually prefers to have that as part of a single stack and just treat it all the same. Unless you need individual cubes like this or something of that nature, it's probably better to just do it this way. It also makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to move this stuff around because now I can just go and grab any of these items, or the first item in the stack, and move this up a little bit higher, move it down, relocate it a little bit, whatever it might be. In my original test, I had a couple of cubes falling on the side of the glass, and it wasn't super awesome. I kind of want to get them all in there. So let's just line this up a little bit better, move it over. So that makes it easier for me to try to aim everything in the glass. So with Bullet, we've got our animation set up. All of these are just going to be using box, simple, very simple. So we're not evaluating by mesh or convex pieces. And they're just set to rigid, very, very small collision object margin. These objects are very small. They're only 1.5 centimeters wide. So if you remember from Bullet when it was introduced years ago, It works best going up to 9 meters and doing about 90 centimeters. That's the range, 1 meter to like 9 or 10 meters. That's where it works best. That's the sweet spot. Although it can handle smaller sizes and larger sizes, it's just an evaluation of accuracy within those ranges. So that gives us the ability to just basically sim out. Let's go to the end. We'll simulate our dynamics. We'll see how many ice cubes go off the side. Okay, there's our simulation. And you'll notice here I've also got a nice little animation on the cup, which is great. So just to demonstrate that, let's go to the wireframe mode here. And we'll just scrub through. So there's our animation. So one of those ice cubes goes off into outer space here, but that's just simply because it's got very little friction. They are ice cubes. They are meant to slide. And the cup goes up. Now, the goal of our project here is to actually have these cubes emitting a little bit of gas, similar to dry ice, and when the cup pours over, that gas will also flow from the cup onto our cubes. So let's take a look at the settings of the emitters first. In here we have under general, the radius for this is going to be 1 millimeter. So it's very, very close to the surface. Again, these are only 1.5 centimeters in cubic space. So they're 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.5 centimeters. So very, very close. And they are going to act as collision objects. They're not going to have any texture volume scale, although I could add some a little bit here. That probably be quite handy. It doesn't need to be big. We can go 0.1. So it's 100 millimeters. This will be a large breakup pattern though, even on top of these ice cubes. So let's go maybe 10 millimeters. So that's, well, that's a little small. Let's go 25. Yeah, a little bit bigger. Okay, so under force, let's talk about this. The default for velocity scale is normally 900. I want this to be kind of thicker in terms of its viscosity and how it flows. TFD is a system that works with computational fluid dynamics. These are non-compressible fluids. So their ability to move in a natural manner is largely controlled through velocity scale, and then pressure and other factors with wind will drive how the gases behave as they are being emitted and how they rest on things. And a phenomenon called ablation is something that you be looking for in normally a heat scenario. If you've ever seen testing of heat shields or something like that, you'll see that in a lot of these tests there's a layer of plasma that goes over top of the surface and actually protects it from actually superheating and effectively melting a heat shield. A lot of those materials are actually designed to produce that gas or deflect gas in such a way that that gas layer forms and the actual direct friction isn't hitting the material in a more direct manner. There's that thin layer of plasma that's over the top, and it helps protect the heat shield. In this scenario, we're going to be adding kind of a similar effect to that by allowing for just a slight amount of pressure, and it's going to continuously kick off the gas, because when carbon dioxide, which is what, say, dry ice is, cooled to a superstate or supercooled state, it will basically evaporate without going from a solid to a liquid. It goes basically straight to a gas. So that's the idea here, is that we're giving it just a straight amount of gas that's coming off of the surface of it, and that's that ablation layer. For this, we're going to be using channel density, and we're going to be setting this to add, so it's going to be continuously kicking out and adding gas to the value of the density set here, rather than set, which would just be this is the amount of voxels being produced, and that's that. This is going to continue to add to those voxels as it emits, and that gives us this nice fog layer here. But there's a few more things here that are important to look at, and that's in the containers tab. Under the simulation, very basic, one frame, substeps, no pressure iteration limit change. We're going to just use regular cubic interpolation, and we're going to leave the collision objects in large container. We're not going to worry too much about collision surface rendering smoothing, although with the glass, because it is round, we could probably turn that on, but it's going to slow down the calculation. So before I commit to it in, say a production render or something like that, I want to see how things are kind of moving, and if I have issues, I'll probably turn this on. But for right now, I don't need to. And you'll notice that this glass is very simple. It's all quads, which is good, but it's not sub-patched. It doesn't need to be, unless we go for final render. And keep in mind that when TFD does its evaluations on any type of object, collision object, surfaces, as emitters, doesn't matter, it's always going to look at the sub-patch value of what is being displayed in OpenGL. So if your sub-patch value is set to 3, it's going to be 3 times or 3 resolution steps for the mesh. If it's set to 0, it's going to be exactly 0, and it's going to be what you have displayed in OpenGL. So if you have an object that needs to be subdivided at render time way up there, and you need to match very closely what the gas is doing to the surface of an object, and it has to conform to that shape, you're going to have to up that visible in OpenGL subframe or subdivision level to approximate what you've got in render as closely as possible without slowing things down. But you can always dial it back. Once you've got something that looks pretty good, and if it's in motion, a lot of people are not going to even notice or care. But if you're up close on something, or if it really needs it, then you're going to need that. But ultimately, for this is just basically playing around because it's really, really hot, and we want to have some fun here. So wind, I'm not going to add any wind whatsoever. I am going to add some vorticity though, and it's going to be on a default vorticity mapping F curve or function curve. And what this does actually in animation, once we do a simulation on this, is it will produce really nice looking kind of swirls here on the ground. But normally swirls are something when an object passes through it in a certain direction, but this stuff's kind of sitting on the ground. So where does it get the velocity from? Well, it comes from the pressure coming off of the cubes, as well as the fact that when we go to the next tab and we take a look at the turbulence, we've got a little bit of animation that's going to be applied to it. But ultimately, the density, we've got 5 millimeters of gravity going in negative y direction, so it needs to find somewhere to go. And because the liquids are non-compressible, they have to move each other, and that's where we get that kind of swirl coming from, which you'll see once we do a simulation. I can do a preview animation render for you. Now, we want this gas to hang around for a significant amount of time. So the dissipation on this is normally 2%. For this, we want very long half-life, so we're going to go 0.05, and you'll see that this is now in seconds, a very, very significant amount of time. We could probably cut that down to 5, but I want this to really be present, so we're going to go 0.5, so basically almost infinite. It will eventually dissolve and dissipate, but for right now, this is good to go. We've already done our simulation on the animation for the cubes and the glass. So what's next is to basically hit start on the simulation and let it cook off that portion. We have our voxel size, which is 2 millimeters, so it's going to be close but not too close to the edge of the cube. It's going to be just enough to interact once it moves. And a grid size is 1 meter by 300 millimeters by 1 meter. Really not very large. And I've got this cache directory set to my fastest drive, which is the M.2 drive from Sabrent. And it's a 1 terabyte pilot drive, and it works very, very well. I do all my caching in TFD to this. Recommend you always use an M.2 or at least an SSD for doing turbulence FD caches, because the faster you can write to disk, the faster you're going to be able to do your simulations. At a certain point in time, your graphics card, which in this case is a 4060 Ti or RTX 4060 Ti, which has 16 gigs of VRAM, that bottleneck that's there is really not on the card, although it's only 128-bit bus, and most of the newer graphics cards are 128-bit or higher, or sorry, 192-bit or higher for their memory bus. But this particular card was a very budget card. Cost me $350 US about a year ago, and it works amazingly. For me to step up into a 4070 Ti or a 4080 or a 4090, which would be requiring me to have a nuclear power plant on its own just to run, this was the best choice because it gave me 16 gigs of RAM, and it was $450 at the time, and right now I think they've dropped the price down to $349 or less. So if you're looking for a graphics card, try and look for the 4060 Ti's if you don't want to break the bank. Now, that cache directory is already set up. I've actually got a cache in here, but I'm going to sim it anyways because we changed the position of our ice cube. So we're going to hit start, and we'll be back in just a minute once this completes its simulation, and we'll continue on.